This program is sponsored by the Durell Institute at Shenandoah University, a nonprofit organization dedicated to research and education in the areas of history, economics, political science, law, and related disciplines concerning money and banking in the United States.
The Federal Reserve announced today that the money supply grew by 17% last year. That's the biggest increase in 25 years. The Dow Jones...
Some members of Congress are proposing that the government sell all that gold we have buried at Fort Knox and use the proceeds to pay off part of the national debt. In administration's...
The government announced that the Consumer Price Index rose to 138 last month. That means what cost $100 in 1982 cost $138 today. The White House.
We see and hear stories every day about money on TV, from the radio, in the newspaper. It's an issue that's on everybody's mind, and in one way or another, money impacts all of us. Where did this stuff come from? How long has it been around? How much of it do we have? And what makes a dollar worth a dollar? Well, money, in one form or another, has been in existence for more than 25 centuries. But ideas about what money represents and the way things were bought has changed many times over the years. Before money existed as coins and paper, things had to be exchanged using the barter system. Think how complicated things would be if we had to do that today.
12 cans of pop, right?
Well, that was last week. This week I really need bananas. A couple pounds.
Bananas?
Somebody figured out that all this could be done a lot more simply if everyone agreed on a medium of exchange, something everyone would accept in exchange for goods and services. Problem was that finding something everyone would accept wasn't as simple as it sounds. For something to work as money, it has to be scarce, easily divisible, portable, and indestructible. There aren't too many things that fit those criteria. Early societies used many different types of commodities that had common value among the community. Salt, stones, glass beads, jewelry, goats, cattle, fish, rare spices, teas, feathers, and even human skulls were used as money. Metallic money, metal coins, was the most common early form of money. Gold was used as coins by the Lydians as early as the 7th century BC. It was the first money minted by the state, and that coincided with the first recorded shops that engaged in retail transactions. When gold became the common monetary standard for trade in the 13th century, things started to get complicated. Although gold satisfies two of the earlier mentioned requirements for being a commodity that works well as money, it fell short in two important regards as well. It was scarce and easily divisible, but it wasn't exactly indestructible. It could be melted down, diluted, mixed with other money, and clipped by enterprising hands that wanted to augment their savings. And it was hardly portable, at least beyond a certain amount. This stuff is heavy. There were conflicting demands for gold, too. The beauty and relative durability of gold has always made it attractive in the making of jewelry and sacred objects, and even dental work. Instead of carting all that gold around, which was both difficult and unsafe, people began leaving their gold coins with goldsmiths for safekeeping before long journeys. The goldsmith gave them a receipt for the amount deposited, and that could be exchanged for the real thing at the other end of the trip by an associate of the first goldsmith. These early receipts marked the birth of paper currency. You can probably now guess where they're saying "it's as good as gold" came from. It became easier to pay debts with the paper receipts than actually drawing out gold coins for every transaction. Goldsmiths were good businessmen and soon realized they could make loans simply by issuing receipts and collecting interest for their efforts. It all worked out fine so long as all the people with pieces of paper didn't demand their gold at the same time, because the goldsmith didn't really have as much gold on hand as he had receipts floating about.
Essentially, that's how our modern monetary system began. That's why we call our banking system fractional reserve banking. The idea is that you begin with something solid like gold and then expand the money supply in fractions. In other words, banks, just like the medieval goldsmith, have only a fraction of the money they receive as deposits on hand in the form of cash and coins. How did those early receipts evolve into today's familiar U.S. paper currency?
A shortage of money was a problem for the early American colonies because England forbid them from making their own. In time, coins from other European nations began to be used. The most popular of these, because of its consistent silver content, was the Spanish pillar dollar. Its name was derived from the imprint of the coat of arms of the Spanish monarchy, flanked by two pillars on the coin's reverse side. Colonial accounting books of the 17th and 18th centuries registered receipt and payment of this currency with an S with two pillars drawn through it, denoting the Spanish origin of the coin. Thus was born today's familiar dollar sign. Examination of the anatomy of today's U.S. paper currency points to the other historic roots of that currency. Since 1935, the $1 note has carried the Great Seal of the United States on its reverse. The Latin inscription E pluribus unum, meaning out of many, one, a reference to the joining of many states into one union, appears on one side. On the seal's reverse are two inscriptions, on Vit Septus, meaning he has favored our undertakings, and Novus Ordo Seclorum, meaning a new order of the ages. Also on the reverse, in Roman numerals on the base of an unfinished pyramid, is the year the Declaration of Independence was signed. In 1955, Congress authorized inclusion of the inscription, "In God We Trust," on all U.S. currency, paper money, as well as coins.
Which was probably wise because, as we're going to see, there's a lot of faith involved here. There was a time when these dollars were backed by gold, but that's no longer the case.
In 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt took office during a national economic crisis. Many banks had failed because of financial problems stemming from the Great Depression, massive unemployment, and the 1929 stock market crash. People feared that the entire banking system was in danger of collapse, so they were exchanging their paper money for gold, seriously depleting the nation's gold supply. So Roosevelt took emergency measures, temporarily closed the banks, and declared the government would no longer redeem dollars for gold. Citizens hoarding gold were required to sell it back to the government. He then took the nation off the pure gold standard. Paper currency was backed by the assets in the banking industry, not gold. That meant the Treasury could begin printing more money to help stimulate the economy. In 1934, Roosevelt signed the Gold Reserve Act, which made it illegal for U.S. citizens to own gold bullion or coins to use as a medium of exchange. Gold became the property of the government and was used for international transactions only. The act also reestablished the link between gold and money. The government was required to hold 25% of the basic money supply in gold. After that, the amount of paper money that could be issued was limited to a fixed percentage of the gold the government had on hand to back it up. The link between gold and money was finally completely severed in 1971 by President Richard Nixon, again to stabilize the nation's economy. And U.S. gold reserves were no longer released for any transaction, either domestic or international.
Today, it's the government and the nation's banking system that creates and backs our money. Here's how it works. When you see this, you know you're looking at money. But all that paper is only part of our money supply. We've got, maybe $300 or $400 billion worth of these coins and currency rattling around in our pockets and sitting in bank vaults. But the U.S. money supply runs into the trillions. A trillion, you remember, is 1,000 billion. Now, how can we say that the money supply is several trillion dollars when we know there's really only a few billion dollars in coins and currency out there? Here's where the idea of fractional reserve banking enters the picture. When the link between money and gold was severed, the amount of money that could be issued became a question for the government to decide. It does this by allowing the banking system to create money. Well, banks can't create money all on their own. They operate under the watchful eyes of central banking authorities at the Federal Reserve Bank, which most people call the Fed. The limitation the Fed places on the bank's creation of money is, you guessed it, that banks have to keep a percentage of their deposits on reserve. The rest they can lend out and in the process create money.
The Federal Reserve also tries to ensure that banks don't create so much money that we get inflation, too much money, which drives up prices. Inflation erodes the buying power of the dollar. If you have $1 today and prices increase by 3% a year, then after 10 years your dollar's worth only 74 cents. After 20 years, it's worth only 55 cents, and after 30 years, only 41 cents. The Fed also tries to make sure that banks don't create so little money that we suffer from a recession, which causes production to fall and generates unemployment. The nation's 12,000 or so banks, along with about another 8,000 savings and loan associations, savings banks, and credit unions, together create the vast majority of our money. All these financial institutions act as intermediaries, go-betweens, between people who deposit money and people who borrow money.
By understanding how the process works, we can demystify the supposed magic of the money creation process that greases the wheels of commerce. Here's how it works.
I like to deposit $1,000.
A bank customer, Jennifer, deposits $1,000 cash to her checking account. Now, what is the bank going to do with that deposit? The bank wants to put the deposit to work by lending it so the money can earn interest. Everybody knows that, but how that $1,000 deposit creates new money is not so obvious. Banks can't lend out all of their deposits because the Federal Reserve requires all financial institutions to keep a percentage of deposits on reserve. So let's see what happens to Jennifer's $1,000 deposit. The banks are required to keep 10% of checking deposits on reserve, in this case $100. The remaining 90%, $900, can be lent to other customers. Later in the day, another customer comes into the bank and wants to borrow $900 to buy a new computer. The bank lends the customer Jennifer's $900 to buy the computer. Then the customer goes to the computer store and buys the computer with Jennifer's $900. Did you follow what just happened here? The original $1,000 deposit is still in Jennifer's checking account. The computer store now has $900 new dollars in an account at its bank. So as if by magic, $1,000 has become $1,900. But wait, there's more. The computer store's bank will put its new $900 deposit to work. The bank has to keep 10%, or $90, on deposit, but can lend the remaining $810 to another customer. With a 10% reserve requirement, the total amount of money that could be created out of Jennifer's original $1,000 deposit would be $10,000.
The name for this money creation process is the multiple expansion of bank deposits. And the money that's created is known as checkbook money because it's the process of writing checks that makes it work. By now you might be getting a sense of how there can be trillions of dollars in our money supply when there's only a few billion dollars in actual paper and coins. The banking system has created a great deal of new money this way.
In 1992, there was $310 billion in coins and currency in circulation. Add $644 billion in checkbook money, and you get $954 billion, what economists call M1, the basic money supply. Where there's an M1, there's probably an M2, right? Right. If we add all the money in savings accounts to the cash and checking accounts in our sample year, we're right at $3.5 trillion, M2. M3, anyone? Large, long-term savings accounts are a separate category. They add another $700 billion, bringing the grand M3 total to $4.2 trillion. It should be clear by now that if everyone wanted their money at the same time, the banking system would have a problem coming up with the cash. It isn't there. Fortunately, that's not a problem because everyone doesn't want their money at the same time. Even if they did, the government would make sure it was available, probably by writing a lot of checks. Keeping your money in the bank is still the safest thing you can do with it.
We've learned quite a bit about money and how it works in this excursion into the mystical world of money. Paper receipts from medieval goldsmiths were the forerunner of today's paper currency. Our modern monetary system evolved from coins and other forms of money. For hundreds of years, paper currency was backed by how much gold a country had on hand until that system was abandoned in the early 1970s. Now our money is created through the modern banking system under the watchful eye of the Federal Reserve and the government. The modern monetary system may be a little more complicated than it was when people traded goats, cows, seashells, or skulls, but it serves its purpose to make exchanging goods and services easier. And it works just fine so long as we continue to believe it works. Any way you look at it, the world would be a pretty complicated place to do business without money. But it doesn't have to be mysterious once you understand what money is and how it makes our economy work.